Chapter 1. Allison Farmington said goodbye to Dr. Wilkinson's last patient and started to clean up the exam room. She hoped to have her responsibilities finished early. She had been working as a nurse for Dr. Wilkinson for the past 9 years, ever since she'd turned 18. At that time, she had been living at Mary's Home for Girls. She had always wanted to be a nurse, so when she turned 18, Mrs. Davis, one of the owners of Mary's Home, arranged for Allison to study and learn under Dr. Harry Wilkinson. This man had practiced medicine in Jacksonville, North Carolina for many years. Allison had loved learning from Dr. Wilkinson. He was willing to teach her anything she wanted to learn. He taught her how to set broken bones and how to stitch deep cuts, in addition to the standard nursing jobs. After 2 years of studying with Dr. Wilkinson, she had received a job offer to work in his office. A portion of her salary went towards room and board as she stayed in a small room at Dr. Wilkinson's home, where he lived with his wife. She had loved living in Mary's home with 9 other girls. She had grown close to some of the girls, as if they were her sisters. Most, however, had moved on. They had either married or been able to get a job to support themselves and moved out. She had arrived at Mary's home when she was 16. Only orphan girls lived at the home, but she hadn't been an orphan her entire childhood. She had lived with her mother until her mother's death. Allison suspected her mother had developed gangrene from a deep cut she had received at the factory where she worked. She was convinced that if her mother had received the right medical care, she wouldn't have died. That was why she wanted to be a nurse, so she could help people with their illnesses and injuries. After her mother's death, Allison had been taken to the nearest orphanage, but she hadn't stayed there long, only a few weeks. Because of her age, she had been given the opportunity to live at Mary's home, where they would teach her to cook, clean, and other life skills. She had eagerly accepted, grateful for having left the orphanage behind. She had hated the place. Allison threw away some bloody cotton and torn sheets. She took a wet rag and wiped down the table and equipment that had been used. She hurried through her chores because Mrs. Wilkinson had told her that she had a letter and she wanted to see who had sent it. Even though she was no longer living at Mary's home, and hadn't been for the last 7 years, she had stayed in contact with them, especially with Mrs. Davis. While living there, she had become very close to Mrs. Davis and thought of her as a mother. She was aware that 4 girls who had been living at Mary's home had become mail-order brides over the span of a few years. At first, when Mrs. Davis had told her about the option of becoming a mail-order bride, she hadn't been interested, although she knew some girls needed to have another option besides marrying a local man or finding a job. So for them it was a good fit, but Allison had supported herself. She had her own job that she loved. But as much as she loved working as a nurse, it wasn't fulfilling all of her dreams. Eventually, she wanted to have a family, to be a wife and mother. At the age of 27, she was now considered an old maid, and she was starting to realize she might never find a man who would want to marry her, at least not in Jacksonville. She knew part of the reason she hadn't married yet was because of her size. At 5 feet 10 inches, she was tall for a woman and big-boned. She knew she had inherited her body size from her father, and she usually wasn't troubled by it. She was strong for a woman, and she needed her strength as a nurse. But she also knew men didn't want to marry a woman who was as tall as they were. They wanted a woman who was small and petite. When she'd heard about the last girl who had left for Nebraska, Rachel, she had started to think seriously about her future. She knew she would always have a job as a nurse with Dr. Wilkinson. In fact, he had been talking about the possibility of helping her train to be a doctor so she could someday take over his practice. But did she really want to do that? Did she really want to go through her life without a family of her own? After many days of contemplation, she decided she would look into the possibility of becoming a mail-order bride. She knew she wouldn't be happy to only be a nurse her entire life. She decided to talk to Mrs. Adams, the woman from the newspaper with whom the other 4 girls had met with. Mrs. Adams had given her a letter from a man who lived in South Dakota. She had instantly felt a bond with him, which she thought was strange, but she also decided not to question it. She read, and reread the letter so many times that she could quote it by heart. To whom it may concern. My name is Mitch Atwood, and I live in South Dakota with my 2 children, Emma, who is 8 years old, and Jimmy, who is 5. I am a widower. I own a small farm and am able to provide for my family by raising crops and a few cows, pigs, and sheep. I am looking for a wife. But I want to be upfront and make sure that you understand I am only looking for a mother for my children and someone to take care of the house and cook. I am not looking for love and will insist on a marriage of convenience. I understand that what I am expecting will not be fair, but I am only willing to marry again for my children's sake. If you are interested, please write and we can work out the details. Sincerely, Mitch Atwood. When Allison had first read his words, even though she'd felt a bond with Mitch, she had been hesitant about pursuing the relationship. The letter seemed very abrupt. Then she thought about his children, Emma and Jimmy, 2 children who didn't have a mother. She realized this was her chance to have a ready-made family. She had already resigned herself to how slim the chances were that she would ever have children of her own. She decided she didn't mind that he wanted a marriage of convenience. Besides, when he saw how tall she was, he would most likely be glad that their marriage wouldn't be more than a friendship. Once she had made that decision, Allison had immediately written and let him know she was interested. One of the first things she told him about herself was that she was as tall as a man. She didn't want him to be disappointed by her size. She also stated that, regardless of the stipulation that their marriage be one of convenience, she would expect that there be respect between them. She had sent a separate letter to Emma and Jimmy, asking Mitch to read it to them if he wanted her to be their mother. Allison found that the letter she wrote to the children was much easier to write than the letter to Mitch. She told them about herself, how she had also lost her own mother, and that she worked as a nurse helping others. She told them she loved to read books and sing. She asked them what they liked to do. Mrs. Adams had named a few requirements if Allison wanted to become a mail-order bride, requirements that Allison felt were wise. She was to write only one man at a time. They were to exchange at least 3 letters. If she changed her mind about being a mail-order bride, or decided she didn't want to marry the man she was writing, she was to send one more letter to let him know of her decision. Mitch had sent another letter about a month later. He told her he didn't care what she looked like. He agreed that they would have respect for each other if they married. He also mentioned that Jimmy hadn't said a word since his mother's death. This letter and the next few that they exchanged were just as abrupt as the first one. Mitch obviously didn't mince words. He said what he felt needed to be said and no more. Allison wondered if he talked that way too. If he did, she knew they were going to have a very interesting relationship because she loved to talk. She especially talked when she was nervous. But she also was good at using words to help Dr. Wilkinson's patients feel more comfortable. The doctor had once told her that she had a gift with words. Finally, about 3 months after she had first read Mitch's letter, he sent her some money to come to South Dakota. Allison immediately let Dr. Wilkinson know she would soon be leaving. That's also when she told him about writing Mitch, preferring to see if he was really going to offer marriage before saying anything to him. Dr. Wilkinson, of course, was very concerned. "Allison, dear, you know that I think of you as a daughter. I feel like I should counsel you to really make sure this is what you want to do," he told her after he sat her down in his small office. "Agreeing to marry a man you haven't met seems very risky." "I have been writing him for about 3 months," Allison told him. "I feel good about this decision. This is my only chance to have a family, and Mitch already has 2 children." Dr. Wilkinson shook his head. "I had no idea you wanted to marry so badly. If I had known, I would have introduced you to some of my colleagues. In fact, why don't you wait to give this man an answer for a few months? There is a dinner party Mrs. Wilkinson and I are invited to that is to be held in a few weeks. We can bring you and introduce you around. Maybe there will be someone there who will hold your interest." "Thank you, but no. I'm not interested in going to a dinner party. And the problem isn't finding someone who will hold my interest, it's finding someone who will want me. Allison knew that Dr. Wilkinson never understood why most men didn't want a woman who was as tall as she was. He thought she had chosen not to marry for personal reasons. Of course someone will want you, Dr. Wilkinson protested. You just need to give the man a chance. I know that Mitch wants to marry me. I've made my decision. I will be leaving at the end of the week, Allison said firmly. The good doctor spent a few more minutes trying to persuade her to change her mind. He then sighed. I can see your mind is made up. I admit part of my argument is because I don't want to lose the best nurse I've ever had. Thank you, Dr. Wilkinson. I am grateful for all you have taught me. I really am. I just want... Allison hesitated. More. You want a family. I understand, Dr. Wilkinson told her kindly. But please, promise me something. Anything, Allison responded. She had learned to love Dr. Wilkinson like a father, and she knew she would miss him and his dear wife. If this new life you're seeking isn't what you expect it to be, please know you always have a job with me and a home with us. Allison reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you, Dr. Wilkinson. I will keep your offer in mind. Chapter 2. Mitch used his pitchfork and moved some hay into the empty stalls. His young daughter, Emma, started to spread it around on the ground. Both of his children had been a great help since their mother had died. Even though Emma was only 8, she worked hard and did her best with any job Mitch gave her. She learned fast, and Mitch usually had to show her how to do something only once. He forked some more hay to Emma and glanced over his shoulder at his son Jimmy. He was sitting in the corner of the barn with a few kittens on his lap. Mitch opened his mouth to ask his son to help Emma, but then changed his mind. He was glad to see Jimmy doing something besides staring off into space. His son hadn't said a word since his mother's death. Jimmy would do whatever he was asked to do, but otherwise he would sit and stare, hardly even moving. Mitch did his best to keep Jimmy busy, but this time he'd decided to let him play with the kittens for a while. Pa, I'm almost done. Do you want me to get the eggs next? Emma asked, breaking into Mitch's thoughts. Good idea, Emma, he told her. By the time you've finished, I should have the cow milked, and we can go to the house and eat breakfast. That's good, 'cause I'm starving, Emma exclaimed. She ran out of the barn towards the chicken coop at full speed. Mitch chuckled as he watched his daughter leave the barn. Emma never seemed to run out of energy and ran wherever she went. He picked up the bucket and sat down next to the milk cow. As he milked, he felt a hand rest on his shoulder. Jimmy stood next to him and held up a kitten for him to see. Cute little thing, Mitch said to his son. Why don't you go help Emma get the eggs? Jimmy nodded and set the kitten down next to its siblings. He walked out of the barn and disappeared around the corner. Jimmy always did what Mitch asked him to do, but he acted like a little adult. He found himself wishing Jimmy would throw one of the tantrums he used to perform when he didn't want to do something, the tantrums that had instantly stopped when his mother died. Mitch planted his head against the cow and continued to milk her. His thoughts drifted to Allison, the woman he had been writing to for the last few months. He hoped that his decision to ask her to come and be a mother to Emma and Jimmy was the right thing to do. About 9 months before, Mitch had traveled to a city in Montana intending to purchase a new horse and a few head of cattle. He had been working hard since he had moved his family to South Dakota when Emma was 2 years old. He finally had enough money to increase the number of animals on his small farm. Mitch was always aware that Patricia had hated living on the farm. He had moved them away from a life in the city where Patricia wanted to stay. For her, the thought of living on a dusty, stinky farm was appalling. When Mitch had married Patricia, he had let her know of his plans to own his own farm someday, and she had seemed to accept the idea. However, Mitch later learned that she had agreed to marry him with the idea that she would be able to change his mind. But he wouldn't let anyone or anything stop him from fulfilling his dream of owning his own land. He had hoped that once they moved to South Dakota, Patricia would settle down and learn to enjoy her new life, but that had never happened. When Mitch had left to purchase the animals, Patricia had also left with another man, a man with whom Mitch later learned she had been secretly corresponding with for quite some time. Patricia had left the day after Mitch had, leaving Emma and Jimmy alone on the farm, with firm instructions to not tell anyone what she had done. Emma had tried her best to feed herself and Jimmy, believing her mother would be back in a few days. She obeyed her mother's instructions and didn't tell anyone. Luckily, a neighbor had come to visit and found Emma and Jimmy alone. Emma had been trying to cook some eggs for their breakfast and had burnt them. Black smoke had filled the kitchen, and Emma had burned her hand trying to pull the skillet off the wood stove. Emma was crying, and Jimmy was sitting in a corner shaking. The neighbor, Adelaide, took care of Emma's hand and made them breakfast. She then took them to her house to care for until Mitch returned from his trip. Mitch vividly remembered the day he returned. He'd immediately known that something was wrong, especially when his children hadn't run out of the farmhouse to greet him. After caring for his new animals, he ran to the house and found a note Adelaide had left. He also found a letter in his bedroom from Patricia letting him know to not look for her, that she was not returning. She had decided she didn't want to be married to a farmer anymore. Even though Mitch was deeply hurt that Patricia would leave him and the children, he respected her wishes and didn't try to find her. He collected Emma and Jimmy from Adelaide, and the three of them did their best to move on without Patricia. Then, Mitch received news approximately a month later that there had been a train wreck, and Patricia and the man with whom she had run away had been killed. The wreck happened on a train heading east, and Mitch knew Patricia likely had been traveling back to Philadelphia, where she had grown up. The train crash happened too far away for Mitch to attend her funeral, and he didn't want to leave the children again. Breaking the news that their mother was dead to Emma and Jimmy was one of the hardest things he had ever done. Emma began to follow Mitch all over the farm, not wanting to let him out of her sight. Jimmy tried to deal with her death and stopped talking. Mitch worked from dawn until dusk. They all dealt with Patricia's abandonment and death in different ways. After Patricia had been gone for 6 months, Mitch realized his children needed a mother. The last thing he wanted to do was marry again, so he decided to send for a mail-order bride. He figured most women who were willing to travel and marry someone they had never met were likely desperate and would be willing to marry anyone. He wanted to find someone who would be willing to just be a mother to Emma and Jimmy without expecting a real marriage, and he found Allison. He didn't mind Allison's age or height. In his mind, marrying her was a favor, and she seemed genuinely excited at the idea of becoming a mother. He just hoped their union wouldn't turn out to be a mistake. But the marriage would need to benefit all of them. His children would have a mother again. Allison would have a family. Mitch could work on his farm without having to worry about his children's safety and care. Mitch finished milking and strained it into a metal can. Emma ran into the barn. "I got the eggs, Pa," she yelled. "Jimmy took them into the house." "Great job, Emma," Mitch told her with a smile and picked up the milk. "Let's go eat." Emma raced alongside him, chattering about the chickens. "I think there's a hen who stopped laying. Do you think we should kill her?" "How long has it been since she's laid?" Mitch asked. Emma shrugged. "Maybe a week. Let's give her some more time." "Okay, Pa." They arrived at the farmhouse, and Mitch quickly made them a breakfast of eggs, toast, and oatmeal. Emma scrunched up her nose when she saw the oatmeal. "Oatmeal again, Pa?" she asked with a frown. Mitch smiled at her. He knew she didn't like oatmeal very much, but it was fast to make and it was filling. "Sit down, both of you. I have some news to tell you." Emma quickly took her place, with Jimmy following. After Mitch served his children, he leaned back, looking at them. "What's your news, Pa?" Emma asked around a mouthful of eggs. "I've been writing a very nice woman who lives in North Carolina," Mitch began, but Emma interrupted. "Where's North Carolina?" Mitch sighed. This was another reason why they needed a mother. Emma needed to go to school and learn things, like where North Carolina was. She had been going to school before Patricia left, but after her death, Emma refused to go. There were a few times when Mitch had forced her to go, but she would leave the schoolhouse and return home the minute the teacher's back was turned. In the end, Mitch had allowed her to stay home, so she had missed the last 4 months of school. Now it was midsummer, and he hoped he would be able to convince Emma that she needed to be in school when it started back up again in the fall. Back east. Anyway, her name is Allison Farmington. She wants to come and live with us. Why? Emma asked, looking confused. She wants to be your mother, Mitch said, as he watched both children closely for their reaction. Emma's face lit up. Really? She wants to be our mother? She nudged Jimmy. We want a ma, don't we? Jimmy shook his head as if he didn't agree with his sister, but of course didn't say anything. He stopped eating and kept his eyes on his plate. Miss Farmington wrote you both a letter. Do you want me to read it to you? Mitch asked. Emma nodded her head vigorously. Yes, read it to us. Mitch left the kitchen to get the letter Allison had written with her first letter. He sat back down in his chair, opened it, and started to read. Dear Emma and Jimmy, my name is Allison, and I am thinking about coming to South Dakota to be your mother. I want to tell you about myself. I'm 27 years old and have been a nurse working for a doctor in North Carolina. I love being a nurse, but I've always wanted to have a family. I love to read books and I like to bake cookies. I also enjoy singing. I have always lived in a city, but I do think it would be fun to live on a farm. What kind of animals live on your farm? I imagine you have horses, cows, chickens, and maybe some kittens. I am very sorry to hear that your mother has passed away. My mother died when I was young, so I understand what it's like. If your father lets you, please write me back and tell me about yourselves. Sincerely, Allison. Mitch looked up from his letter and noticed mixed expressions on his children's faces. Emma looked excited, while Jimmy still looked down at his uneaten food, but Mitch could detect a hopeful expression on his face. What do you think? He asked them. Does she really want to be our mama? Emma asked, as if not believing what she had heard. Do we get to have a mama again? Yes, Mitch answered firmly. I have written her and asked her to marry me. She will be arriving in a few days. Yes, Emma threw her right arm in the air. Mitch watched as she looked at Jimmy. She'll be a good mama, Jimmy, Emma told her brother as she put her arm around him. She says she likes to read books and bake cookies. Jimmy nodded and gave her a small smile. Mitch felt relieved at his children's reaction to his news. He hadn't been sure that they would want things to change, but evidently he was right. His children wanted a mother. Chapter 3. We should be arriving in Great Springs in 5 minutes, ma'am, the train conductor told her as he passed through the train car. Thank you, she told him, and made sure she had gathered all of her belongings. She was glad she was finally at the end of her trip. She hadn't enjoyed the train ride very much. It was hard to sleep, and the food was awful. Mrs. Wilkinson had given her a basket of food which lasted for a few days, but then she had been forced to purchase her meals. Most of the food available had been dry bread and greasy meats. As she traveled closer to South Dakota, she grew more and more nervous. She had great hopes for her new life, but she also knew things might not be as she hoped. What if Mitch took one look at her and decided he didn't want to marry her? What if his children didn't like her? There were so many what-ifs. The train started to slow and then stopped. Allison gathered her belongings and stepped off the train. She looked around and immediately saw a tall, thin man with 2 children standing beside him. She somehow knew it was Mitch and walked up to them. I am guessing you are Emma and Jimmy, she spoke to the children first. The girl nodded, her eyes expressing delight, while the boy hid behind his father. Did you really come all the way from North Carolina? Emma asked. I wish I could go for a trip on a train. Allison heard Mitch catch his breath, which made her look at him. She held out her hand. I'm Allison. Mitch nodded. I assumed that's who you were. Welcome to South Dakota. He took her hand in his own, and Allison immediately felt a tremble run through her arm. She quickly took in Mitch's looks. He was a tall man, at least 3 or 4 inches taller than she was. She felt a relief to realize he was so tall. Maybe he wouldn't mind her height. Thank you, she responded. For a moment, she didn't have anything to say. Then she mentally shook herself. My trunk is over there. What are your plans? Mitch seemed to know what she was talking about. I'll get your trunk loaded on our wagon. Then we'll head over to the church to get married." "Sounds like a fine idea," Allison said to him. She looked down when she felt a small hand slip into her own and saw that Emma was standing beside her. She bent down to the child's level. "I need someone to be my maid of honor. Would you like to do that for me?" she asked Emma with a smile. "What's a maid of honor?" Emma asked. "It's someone who will stand right next to me and hold my flowers while I marry your dad," Allison explained. Emma jumped up and down with delight and turned to Mitch. "Can I, Pa? Can I be her maid of honor?" Mitch nodded, looking pleased that Allison was doing her best to include Emma in the ceremony. Allison turned to Jimmy. "Would you like to help too, Jimmy?" Jimmy shook his head and hid even further behind Mitch. "Come on, son," Mitch said to Jimmy. "I need your help with Miss Farmington's trunk." "Where will we get the flowers?" Emma asked her. "I was hoping someone wouldn't mind letting us have a few from their gardens," Allison told her. "Do you know of anyone who wouldn't mind sharing?" Emma nodded. "The Reverend's wife has lots of flowers in her yard." Allison smiled at her. "That will work out nicely then, won't it?" While she was talking, she watched Mitch pick up her trunk, allowing Jimmy to grasp one of the handles. They carefully carried it and set it in the back of a nearby wagon. Allison took a moment to watch Mitch as he thrust the trunk on the wagon. He was a rather handsome man, which made her heart jump, but she immediately pushed the feelings down deep inside her. "This is a marriage of convenience," she reminded herself quietly. "I must remember that." Somehow she instinctively knew Mitch wouldn't want her to have feelings for him. When Mitch and Jimmy had joined Allison and Emma, they started to walk down the street towards the white church. "I guess I should ask if you'd like to change before the wedding," Mitch said, stammering a bit as if not sure how to word what he was thinking. "I changed my dress on the train. I'm fine as I am unless you'd prefer me to clean up more," Allison told him. She had been able to give herself sort of a sponge bath in the small restroom on the train, but she knew she didn't look her best. Her light blue flowered dress was clean but wrinkled, having spent its time in her carpet bag since leaving North Carolina. No, you're fine," Mitch said, his face getting a little red. He stepped ahead of her with Jimmy's hand in his and led them down the street. Allison started to talk to Emma. "Tell me about your town. Do you go to school here?" "No, I did go to school, but I haven't been back since Mama died," Emma told her. "Pa needs me to help him." Allison wanted to ask more questions as to why Emma hadn't been attending school, but she knew she should probably wait until later when she was alone with Mitch. "Do you have any friends?" she asked, and listened as Emma talked about two girls with whom she had gone to school, one of whom lived in town and the other of whom lived on a farm next to theirs. Soon they had arrived at the church. The Reverend was already waiting for them with his wife and a few of their children. Mitch introduced them as Reverend and Mrs. Carlson. Emma immediately asked Mrs. Carlson if they could use some of her flowers. "What a wonderful idea," Mrs. Carlson agreed. "Why don't you come with me and choose what you would like? Jimmy, you can come too." Allison watched as Mrs. Carlson took each child by the hand and led them outside. Mitch took her arm and led her to one of the pews in the back of the small chapel. He indicated to her to sit down, and he slid in beside her. "I want to make sure you are okay with this marriage being convenience only," Mitch explained. "I brought you here to be a mother to Emma and Jimmy. I didn't bring you here for anything else." "I'm sure the loss of their mother has hurt them," Allison responded. "They need a stable home, a woman who will love them and teach them. I will never love again." Mitch looked directly at Allison, letting her know there was nothing she could do to change his mind. "You made your wishes plain in your letters," Allison told him. "I didn't come with preconceived ideas. I understand what you want of me, and I agree to your terms. I have to wonder why you chose to come, why you are choosing a marriage of convenience to a man with 2 children." "I want a family," Allison said simply. Mitch looked at her in disbelief. "Surely there are other men you could have married who could give you a real marriage." Allison looked down in embarrassment. "Most men want a small, petite woman, not someone as tall as they are." Mitch's face cleared with understanding. "If it helps any, I don't mind your height." Allison's heart skipped at his words. It was the first time any man had said they didn't mind how tall she was. But then, he was looking at her as a housekeeper and someone to care for his children, not a true wife. "You won't be disappointed in how I perform my duties," Allison told him. "Even though this won't be a real marriage, I won't be very understanding if you decide to change your mind after the I do's." Allison shook her head. "I won't change my mind ever," she said firmly. She looked him straight in the eye, making sure he knew she was serious. "I've prayed about this, and I am convinced that this is what I am to do, what I'm supposed to do." Mitch looked relieved at her words. "Let's get married then." The children entered the chapel with Mrs. Carlson behind them. Each of them held a small handful of cut wildflowers. They both handed Allison their flowers, and her heart melted. "Thank you for the flowers," Allison told them. "They are beautiful." She looked at the Reverend's wife with gratitude in her eyes. Reverend Carlson arranged everyone to stand where he wanted them. Allison stood close to Mitch and the Reverend. Jimmy stood next to Mitch, half hiding behind him. Allison handed the flowers back to Emma, who proudly stood next to Allison and clutched the blossoms in her hands tightly, some of them already drooping in the heat of the day. Allison could tell she was taking her role as maid of honor seriously. The words and promises were quickly exchanged. Mitch kissed her on the cheek when the Reverend prompted him to, moving away from her as soon as he could. Allison couldn't help but feel disappointed. She had seen the marriage kiss between other couples before, and had always secretly looked forward to someday experiencing her own. Given the speed with which Mitch had moved away so quickly, Allison received the distinct impression that he had no desire to touch her, and she attributed it to her height, even though he had told her he didn't mind how tall she was. She knew she wasn't beautiful, and she concluded that Mitch wasn't even attracted to her. She again reminded herself of the real reason she had agreed to marry Mitch, to be a mother to Emma and Jimmy. After thanking the Reverend and his wife, Mitch hurried everyone outside, expressing his need for haste because of the chores he had left undone back at the farm. Allison quietly followed him, half listening to Emma, who still clutched the flowers, chatting about how happy she was that she had a mama again. "How far away is your farm from town?" Allison asked when she was seated on the wooden bench of the wagon next to Mitch, the children in the bed behind them. "Not far, maybe a 15-minute drive," Mitch told her. She noticed Mitch had relaxed when they were on their way to his farm. He even answered a few of her questions. She learned he owned a couple of horses and the beginnings of a herd of cattle. Emma let her know that they had 2 pigs, a few sheep, chickens, and a dog, and that their barn cat had just given birth to kittens a few weeks prior. While they talked, Allison glanced at their surroundings and liked what she saw. South Dakota was very different from North Carolina, with her home state being much greener. But South Dakota had a good feel to it, and she could tell the land was perfect for farming. She could see some hills in the distance that she knew she would want to explore. "That's where my friend Penny lives," Emma told her, pointing to a farm as they passed. "They live right next to us. Her mother will probably be by in a few days to meet you." "I look forward to meeting her. So that means we must be almost home," Allison said, letting Mitch know she already claimed his farm as her own. "When we arrive, I must have a tour of the farm. Do you think you can give me a tour, Emma and Jimmy?" "Yes," Emma said with delight. "We can show her everything, right, Pa?" Mitch just nodded. He directed the horses who were pulling the wagon off the main road to a smaller dirt road on the right. Soon they stopped in front of a small, well-kept barn. Allison allowed Mitch to help her down, then looked around. She could tell immediately that Mitch took very good care of his farm. The house looked like it had been recently painted in a light blue color. There was a small garden that had rows of vegetables growing on the side of the house. Emma immediately started to point out the cows in a field, the chicken coop, and a dog that came to greet them. "This is Boss," Emma said, as the border collie came up to sniff her. "Boss?" Allison laughed at the name. "Yes, Pa says he's the boss of the cows, so he calls him Boss." The explanation seemed to make perfect sense to Emma, but Allison was confused. How can a dog be the boss of a bunch of cows? Jimmy wants you to see the kittens, Emma told her. Allison noticed that the small boy was standing in the doorway of the barn with something small in his arms, then turned to walk inside. Allison looked around for Mitch, but he had already lifted her trunk and was walking towards the house. She shrugged her shoulders and followed Emma to the barn. She wasn't prepared for the smell, even though she had been in barns before. The owners of Mary's home raised horses, and she had ridden them a few times. This barn seemed clean, but there was an obvious smell of manure. She could see Jimmy standing in a corner by a wooden crate. "Let's see these kittens," she said to Jimmy and looked into the crate. "They are really small. How many are there?" Jimmy held up 5 fingers. "5, huh? Are you going to keep them all?" Allison asked as she reached a hand out to hold a kitten. "Pa says we have to find homes for them all. We only have enough mice for 1 cat," Emma said matter-of-factly. Allison noticed Emma didn't mind they weren't keeping any of the kittens, but she saw Jimmy's face fall. He clutched the kitten he held closer to him, and she knew he had fallen in love with that particular animal. "Pa says if we kept every animal that's born on our farm, we'd soon be overrun," Emma continued. Allison put the kitten she held down in the box. She looked around the barn and saw a cow in a corner chewing its cud. "That's Bessie, our milk cow," Emma explained. "She gives sweet milk, although she'll go dry soon." "Why is that?" Allison asked her. "She's going to have a calf soon," Emma explained. Allison knew she had a lot to learn about farm life, but she was determined to learn all that she could. She wanted to be a help, not a hindrance. After Emma had shown her everything she could in the barn, Allison suggested they go find their dad. Emma agreed and told Jimmy to come with them. When they left the barn, Allison couldn't see Mitch anywhere. "Pa's probably out working," Emma said. "I need to go help him." Before Allison thought of stopping her, the girl ran in search of Mitch and was soon out of sight. Jimmy then made a move to follow his sister, but Allison needed someone to help navigate her new surroundings and stopped him. "Why don't you come into the house with me?" Allison suggested. "I need some company and maybe you could help me make dinner." Jimmy hesitated and then nodded. Over the next hour, Emma gave herself a tour of the house, making sure to keep Jimmy at her side. The farmhouse had 2 stories. On the first floor was the kitchen, a small pantry, and a living room that could also be a parlor. Everything was decorated very simply, but Allison liked what she saw. 2 sofas flanked the fireplace, creating a cozy seating area. Above the fireplace, a long wooden shelf held a large clock, while a colorful rug brightened the wooden floor. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. In the first room, she noticed 2 small beds and realized this was where Emma and Jimmy shared their space. She peeked in the room that was across the hall and saw her trunk on the floor. She could tell it was the room Mitch used because of the large bed with cowboy boots in a corner, and she wondered what sleeping arrangements he had in mind for the 2 of them. She decided she'd unpack her trunk later and to start on dinner. "What should we eat for dinner?" Allison asked Jimmy when they were both in the kitchen. "Can you show me what you like to eat?" Jimmy nodded, and with his help, Allison soon had a simple vegetable stew cooking on the wood stove. Jimmy helped her make biscuits. He showed her where the milk and butter were kept. Whenever Allison asked him a question, he would show her or point to what she wanted. She was intrigued by his ability to meet her every need without ever saying a word. Allison kept up a one-sided conversation as she worked. He seemed to accept that she was there and that she was his new mother, but he didn't seem happy about it. After she finished the biscuits and slid them in the oven to bake, she made an instant decision. "Do you like stories, Jimmy?" she asked him, and then continued without waiting for him to respond. "Because I brought a few children's books with me. Would you like me to read you a story while the biscuits bake?" Jimmy's eyes lit up as he nodded. "Great. Come with me. The books are in my trunk, and I might need your help." The boy followed her willingly, and she soon had her trunk opened. She knew exactly where the books she had bought especially for Emma and Jimmy were, and she handed a few of them to Jimmy. One of them was about a farm dog, and the other was a book of poems for children. "Which one would you like me to read to you?" she asked him. Jimmy looked at each book carefully and then held out the one about the dog. "Good choice," she told him as she put the other book away. "We can read the other one with Emma." They walked down the stairs into the parlor, where Allison had noticed a rocking chair. "Shall we sit in this chair so I can read to you?" Jimmy hesitated and then nodded. Soon they were both comfortable in the rocking chair with Jimmy sitting on her lap. She read the story slowly, letting the boy look at each picture before she turned the page. She tried to keep her tears at bay while she read. She finally had a family. She had a son and a daughter. She knew she had made the right decision in coming to South Dakota. Chapter 4. Mitch turned as he heard his daughter shout his name. He watched as she ran as fast as she could to his side. "I can help, Pa. What do you want me to do?" she asked breathlessly. "You don't have to help, Emma. Go back inside with your new ma. She might need help to get settled." Emma shook her head stubbornly. "Jimmy can help her. It's my job to help you." Mitch opened his mouth to send her back, but then stopped. Now that Allison was here, he didn't want Emma to feel like she had to help him all the time. He wanted her to learn some of the things small girls should learn, but he also knew now was not the time to address this issue. Emma must have read something in his face. "You said I'm your best helper." "That you are, Emma. Why don't you pick up the small pieces of wood over there? Go put them on the wood pile." Emma happily did his bidding, and he watched her for a moment. He felt an anger towards Patricia. Both of his children had changed dramatically because of the choices she had made. Jimmy refused to say a word and had become very clingy, almost as if he were afraid something would happen to him. Emma refused to go to school, insisting she needed to stay at home and help. He didn't understand why both of his children were doing the things they were doing, but he did know it was all tied to their mother's abandonment and death. He hoped that now, with Allison here, his children might start behaving as they had when Patricia was still with them. He noticed that Jimmy had stayed in the house with Allison, and he took it as a hopeful sign. Mitch's thoughts turned to Allison as he started to work on the fence he was repairing. He was surprised at his reaction to her when she stepped off the train. In her letters, she had described herself as plain and too tall, but in Mitch's mind, she was perfect. Patricia had been a small woman, and he liked the idea of having a wife who was closer to his height. Her dress was wrinkled and some hair hung down from the bun she wore, but her blue eyes twinkled as she greeted his children and then looked at him. He felt as if he had been sucker-punched. She was quite attractive in his mind. On the way to the church, he had needed to remind himself of why he was marrying her. He didn't want another wife. He just wanted a mother for his children. He wasn't going to allow another woman to hurt him again. Allison seemed to accept him for who he was. She showed what seemed to be a genuine interest in the farm, and he hoped that meant she would be happy here. He could tell both children already liked her. After fixing the fence, he glanced at the sun and knew it was time to go eat dinner. He hoped Allison had been able to make something in the few hours since they'd arrived home. It would be nice to eat someone else's cooking for a change. "Emma, that's enough for today. Let's go eat dinner," he called to his daughter, who immediately joined him. "I'm sure hungry, Pa," Emma commented, rubbing her stomach. "I could smell something good clear out by the woodpile." "Sounds like Allison has been able to prepare something then," Mitch told her. When they entered the house, he was pleasantly surprised to see Jimmy setting the table. Allison was at the stove stirring something, talking to Jimmy as she worked. There was a plate of biscuits piled high on the table, with a bowl of butter and strawberry preserves that Adelaide had given them earlier that summer. Allison turned when she heard them coming into the kitchen. "You're just in time. Go wash up and we can eat." Emma walked to the stove and peered into the bubbling pot. "She made stew, Pa," she exclaimed. "Well, let's hurry and get washed up. Then we can taste the meal Allison made for us," Mitch said, as he poured hot water into a basin. "Jimmy helped too," Allison said. "He helped me find all the ingredients I needed and helped make the biscuits." "We get biscuits too?" Emma asked as if she couldn't believe it. biscuits are my favorite. I'll have to remember that. Maybe I can teach you how to make them. You're old enough, Allison offered with a smile to the girl. Emma shook her head. Thanks for offering, but I need to help Pa outside. Allison opened her mouth to object, but saw Mitch look at her as he shook his head slightly. Later, he mouthed, so Allison kept silent. Soon the blessing was said and the small family started to eat their first meal together. Allison was glad she remembered the cooking lessons she had learned at Mary's home. She hadn't had much of a chance to cook while she lived at the Wilkinsons'. Very quickly, all the biscuits disappeared and the vegetable stew was gone. I was going to make a dessert, but Jimmy and I read a book and time got away from me, Allison commented. I'll make sure we have something sweet to eat tomorrow. A book? Emma's ears perked up and Allison noticed she looked a little envious of Jimmy. What was it about? Allison waited for a second to see if Jimmy would answer, but his eyes danced with delight. Allison knew he had loved the story. She had ended up reading it to him twice. It was about a farm dog that got into all sorts of trouble, Allison replied. Can you read it to me? Emma asked breathlessly. Mitch broke in. Why don't we help Allison clear the table and do the dishes, then she can read it to all of us. Emma liked that idea and immediately started to gather dishes in her arms. Allison started to pour some hot water into a dishpan when Mitch elbowed her to the side. Let me do that. I'm used to washing dishes. Why don't you dry? Allison was surprised at his offer. Dr. Wilkinson had never stepped into the kitchen to do any type of work. In his mind, the kitchen was a woman's domain, and Mrs. Wilkinson didn't seem to mind. But then, Allison knew Mitch had needed to do quite a bit of housework since his wife's death. She stepped back and allowed Mitch to start the dishes. Emma gave her Pa a stack, while Jimmy did his best to wipe down the table. Allison was pleased to see that the children had been trained how to help each other. The rest of the evening was very relaxing. Emma tried to read the book out loud, saying the words haltingly and needing help with some of them. She started to feel tired halfway through the story, and Mitch took over the reading. When he had finished it, he instructed Emma and Jimmy to get ready for bed. A few minutes after they left the room, Mitch followed, and Allison could hear soft murmuring as Mitch helped them get ready to turn in. Allison wanted to join the nightly ritual, but Mitch hadn't invited her. She remained seated and started to darn some of Jimmy's socks. When Mitch finally came back into the living room, she glanced up from her darning, smiled at him, and continued to stitch. I guess I'm also going to turn in. I'll let you have the room upstairs and I'll sleep out here. Where will you sleep? Allison asked as she looked around the room. The sofa wasn't large enough for him to sleep on. I'll just make a pallet on the floor. I have a question for you. Did you share a room with your wife? Mitch scowled at her. Of course I did. So the children are used to you sleeping with your spouse. I am now their new mother. Don't you think we should at least share the room so the children aren't confused about our relationship? Mitch shook his head. I don't think that's necessary. Children are pretty smart, Mitch. If you want me to be a mother to them, I think they need to at least think we have the same relationship that you and your wife had. It might confuse them if they notice I am in the room by myself and you are sleeping out here. Why don't you make the pallet on the floor of the bedroom? Mitch looked as if he wanted to argue, but then sighed. All right, we'll try it your way. Allison felt relieved when Mitch agreed to her suggestion. She didn't know why she felt so strongly about having Mitch sleep in her room, even though their marriage would not have the same relationship in the bedroom. And yes, part of the reason was so the children weren't confused, but she knew deep down it wasn't the entire reason. I'll let you get ready for bed then, Mitch told her. I'll come in later and make up the pallet. He nodded at her and then left the house, presumably to check on the animals in the barn before he retired for the night. Allison set the sock she was darning aside to be finished the next day and went up the stairs to the room she would be sharing with Mitch. She quickly washed her face and brushed her hair. After changing into a clean but wrinkled nightgown, she was ready to get into bed, when she looked at the empty space on the floor where she knew Mitch would be sleeping. I might as well make a bed for him, she thought to herself. She noticed a large trunk at the foot of the bed, so she opened it and found many blankets and quilts. She pulled a few out and quickly made up a pallet with the blankets and added a pillow. She then heard the kitchen door open and close and quickly climbed into her bed, making sure she was fully covered with a blanket. She could hear Mitch walk around and then his footsteps on the stairs. The door opened and she rolled onto her side, pretending to be asleep. She heard a boot drop on the floor and then another. Soon Mitch blew out the lantern and she heard him settle into his pallet on the floor. Allison tried to keep her breath even, as if she was asleep. After a few minutes, as she started to relax, she heard Mitch speak. "Thanks for making my bed," he said quietly in the darkness. Allison hesitated before answering. Obviously, she hadn't fooled him by pretending to be asleep. "You're welcome," she whispered back. Chapter 5. The next morning started out with difficulties. Allison had risen early so she could make a good breakfast for her new family. She had chosen to make oatmeal toast and scrambled eggs. When it was ready, Mitch called both children to the table. They came into the kitchen slowly, rubbing the sleep away from their eyes. After everyone had sat down, Mitch said a prayer on the food. After saying "Amen," Allison took a bite of her oatmeal, then immediately noticed that both Emma and Jimmy had sat back in their chairs, refusing to eat their breakfast. "Me and Jimmy hate oatmeal," Emma told her, pushing her bowl away from her in disgust. "Emma," Mitch said to his daughter firmly, "Allison got up early to make this breakfast for us. You need to apologize to her, and then eat what is put in front of you without complaint." Emma frowned at her father, but pulled the bowl towards herself and took a small bite. Jimmy had also pushed his bowl away, but he followed his sister's example and started to eat. "Emma," Mitch said as he reached out to touch her hand. "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "I take it oatmeal isn't your favorite," Allison said to the girl. Emma didn't respond. Allison looked at Mitch for an answer. He looked at her sheepishly. "I'm afraid oatmeal is pretty much all I know how to make for breakfast. Oatmeal and eggs." Allison nodded her understanding. "That's good to know. Tomorrow I'll make pancakes. Does that sound good?" Emma perked up at the idea of eating pancakes. "We haven't had pancakes in forever. Can we have them for lunch instead?" "Sure. I'll make pancakes for lunch if you will eat your oatmeal." "I promise I won't make oatmeal for a while, okay?" Allison replied. Emma nodded and started to eat her oatmeal with a little more enthusiasm. Mitch swallowed the last of his and stood. "I need to get started on my day." "I'm almost done, Pa," Emma said as she took a huge bite. Mitch glanced at Allison. "Emma, now that Allison is here, you don't need to come out and help me anymore." Emma's jaw dropped at her father's words. "But you need my help. I'm your right-hand man, remember? That was when I was trying to take care of you kids alone. Now that Allison is here, I want you to stay with her." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But, Pa, I like working with you." Allison broke in. "I thought we'd wash some clothes today. Then later on we can do some baking. Maybe we can make your favorite cookies." Emma folded her arms and shook her head fiercely. "No, I want to go with Pa." "Emma, my mind is made up. You stay with Allison and Jimmy. Allison can teach you how to do many things." "Like what?" "Like cooking, keeping house, and sewing. Things girls should be doing." Emma sat back down in her chair, hard, glaring at her father, but not daring to say another word. Allison felt bad for Emma. She didn't want the child to resent that she was now in the home. Mitch, maybe. "No," Mitch said again firmly. He picked up his cowboy hat and left the house, letting the kitchen door slam behind him. The children and Allison were silent for a moment. Then Emma stood up. "I'm not going to help you. I don't want to learn how to cook and clean." She ran out of the house. Again, the door slammed behind her. "Emma!" Allison called after her, but the child kept running until she disappeared from sight. Turning to Jimmy, she hesitated, unsure of what to do. Finally, she decided to give Emma some time. She'd finish the breakfast dishes first and then go look for her. Jimmy slowly finished his breakfast and then sat in his chair, staring at the floor. Allison approached him after she finished the dishes, touching his shoulder. "Emma will be fine, Jimmy. Allison told him. There have been quite a few changes, haven't there? Jimmy just shrugged his shoulders. Why don't we go look for her? Do you think you know where she is? Allison asked, holding out her hand to the boy. Jimmy slowly put his hand in hers and pulled her outside. He led her around the house and they started walking towards a clump of trees in the distance. As they got closer, she could see a small stream. Once they were near the trees, Jimmy ran ahead and looked under some thick shrubs. Is this where you two sometimes come to play? Allison asked as she looked under the shrubs. She could see places where the grass and plants had been trampled. There was just enough room under the plants for 2 small children. Allison noticed that Jimmy was looking around frantically. He seemed to have expected to find his sister under the shrubs and trees. He then started to run further down the stream. Allison stopped him. Jimmy, let's go find your father, okay? Maybe Emma is with him. Maybe your father decided to let her help, Allison suggested. She didn't want to lose track of both children. Jimmy nodded again and took off running towards the barn. Allison walked quickly behind him. She hoped Emma was there with her father. Either way, Allison planned to have a talk with Mitch. Emma's dedication to working alongside him was deeply rooted in her young life. Maybe Mitch would agree to a compromise. The children had endured many changes in their young lives. Even though Allison was available to help and teach the children, she didn't think it would be wise to change everything at once. When she entered the barn, she saw that Jimmy was very upset. But of course, since he refused to talk, he didn't tell his father what was wrong. Mitch looked at her with a questioning, concerned look in his eyes. What's going on? Emma took off after you left this morning. I didn't immediately go after her because I thought she just needed some time to adjust to having to stay with me. After I did the dishes, we went to look for her. Jimmy showed me their hiding place by the stream, but she wasn't there. Mitch looked concerned, and he turned to Jimmy. I'll find Emma. You stay with Allison, understood? Jimmy nodded, and Allison watched as Mitch quickly saddled a dark brown horse. I'm sure she hasn't gone far. He looked at Allison, then down at Jimmy, then rode the horse away from the barn, calling Emma's name as he went. Allison noticed that Jimmy had tears running down his face. She marveled that he even cried silently, making no sound. She slipped an arm around him, pulling him close to her. I'm sure your pa will find her, Jimmy. Allison tried to console him, although she felt fear inside her. She wished she had gone after Emma the minute she had left. Let's go see if she has come back and is in the house. Allison took Jimmy by the hand and led him back to the house. She wasn't surprised to find that Emma hadn't returned. She quickly got Jimmy settled at the table with the book she had read to him the day before, instructing him to stay inside. After he nodded his head, showing he understood her instructions, she left the house, calling Emma's name, but there was no answer. She didn't dare walk too far away from the house because she didn't want to leave Jimmy by himself. Suddenly she heard the pounding of horse hooves and turned towards the sound. She could see Mitch riding towards her, and her heart fell when she didn't see Emma with him. I can't find her, Mitch said as he stopped his horse abruptly beside her. How long has she been gone? She ran out of the house soon after you left, Allison told him. I'm sorry that I didn't go after her. I figured she needed some time. It never occurred to me that she'd run off. Mitch looked at her sharply. This isn't your fault, he sighed. I thought she'd want to stay with you. She always works so hard. He shook his head and glanced at some hills in the distance, the same hills she had admired on the drive to the farm the day before. I'm going to head towards those hills. We used to go there for picnics when their mother was alive. He looked at her again, and his face seemed to soften when he saw how concerned she was. Don't worry, Allison. I'll find her. Without saying anything else, Mitch turned and rode away. Allison watched as he quickly became a speck in the distance. Mitch's heart clenched as he urged the horse faster towards the hills. He was convinced that if something were to happen to her, it would be entirely his fault. He should have explained the changes to his daughter more clearly and why he wanted Emma to stay with Allison. But he had never been good with words. He had assumed Emma would have wanted to stay with Allison and not feel like she needed to work so hard around the farm. He knew the hills had a special meaning to Emma. When Patricia had been alive, sometimes they would ride to these hills for a picnic along a small riverbed. To Emma, those were perfect days. What his daughter didn't know was that he usually had to almost force Patricia to come with them. She had hated the excursions. She had hated riding a horse and getting dusty and dirty. She had hated eating food outside where there were bugs. Mitch sighed like he always did when he thought of his late wife. He often wondered why he had married her, but he knew she had been a different person when they were courting. If he hadn't married her, he wouldn't have Emma and Jimmy. He knew he could have made different choices in his marriage. Maybe he shouldn't have left her alone on the farm when he went to purchase the new horse and cows, but he also knew deep down that she would have eventually left him. She hadn't been happy since they had moved to South Dakota. Mitch saw a small figure in the distance and quickly headed in that direction. As he got closer, he could see it was Emma. She was walking towards the hills, but slowly, as if she had become exhausted. He quickly caught up with her. "Emma?" Mitch started to lecture her, but stopped when he saw her face. It was dirty and tear-streaked. Her dress was dusty and torn. He decided the lecture could wait and jumped off his horse. Emma flung herself into his arms. "I'm sorry I ran away, Pa." Emma started to sob. "Running away doesn't solve problems, Emma," Mitch told her. "It was very dangerous. You could have gotten hurt. What if I hadn't found you?" "I was going to be back for dinner," Emma mumbled against his shirt. Mitch held back a chuckle. "You could have gotten lost." "Pa, I wouldn't have. I know where I am," Emma said, sounding exasperated. Mitch stood, lifting her into his arms. "Let's ride over to the river and get you cleaned up." "Then we need to have a talk." Emma nodded. He lifted her onto the horse's saddle and swung up behind her. He directed the horse to the river, which ran along the bottom of the hills. Neither of them talked again, but Mitch heard a sniffle every so often from Emma. After they arrived at the river, Emma washed her face. They both took a much-needed drink, and then Mitch had her sit down on a rock. "Tell me why you left," Mitch said to her firmly. "You don't want me to help you anymore," Emma said with some defiance. "I don't want to learn girl stuff. I thought you married Allison so she could do those things, and I could still help you." Mitch sighed. He didn't know how to explain to her the reason why Allison was in their lives. He wasn't sure if he even knew himself. "Emma, it's true that I married Allison so she could take care of the house and cook for us. I also married her so you and Jimmy could have a mother again." Emma nodded her head solemnly. "I know that, Pa." "You are 8 years old. School will start again soon. You are already behind your class because I didn't make you go after your mother's death." "But, Pa," Emma started to argue. "Emma, you must let me finish, and then you can have your say, all right?" Emma clamped her lips shut and nodded, but her eyes were fierce. Mitch knew she wasn't going to go to school willingly. "We all have jobs. My job is to take care of the farm so we can have enough money to live on. Allison's job is to take care of the house, cook, and take care of you and Jimmy. You have been helping me with my job, and I really appreciate it, but now you have a new job, and that job is to go to school. There are things your teacher can teach you that I can't. You need to learn to read and write. You need to learn how to do math. There is a big world out there beyond our small farm in South Dakota. I want you to learn about it." Emma scrunched her forehead in confusion, trying to understand what he was saying. "So I have a new job now?" "Yes, to go to school and to learn to do the things girls do. I don't want you working so hard like you have been." "But Pa, I like to work on the farm," Emma protested. "Yes, I know. How about this? If you promise to go to school and do your best, and you let Allison teach you things during the week, on Saturdays you can help me all day long." Emma didn't say anything, but Mitch could tell she was thinking about it. "When school is out for the holidays and next summer, you can help me a few days a week," Mitch continued. "Okay, Pa," Emma finally consented. "I guess I can agree to that." "Don't you want to go to school, Emma? Don't you miss your friends?" Mitch asked. Emma shrugged her shoulders. "Some of the kids think we're strange because Ma ran off, and 'cause Jimmy won't talk. I know. I'm sorry some people think like that, but the people who matter, who care about us, don't do that. Sometimes we have to ignore what people are saying. Eventually, someone else will have something bad happen to them, and those people will turn their attention to them. That's not very nice, Pa, Emma said. Why do they do that? I don't know, Emma. Some people like to gossip, and to make the truth seem bigger and worse than it really is, the best thing to do is to ignore it. Usually, it stops. I'm not ever going to do that, Pa, Emma promised him. If something bad happens to someone else, we should help them instead. Mitch smiled at his daughter. You are smarter than some of the townspeople are. That's the best thing to do. Okay, Pa, Emma said with a smile. I'll let Allison teach me to be a girl and go to school like you want me to. I want you to continue to be you, Emma, Mitch told her. Emma stood up and walked towards the river for another drink. When she stood up, with water dripping down her face, she looked at him. Can we come back here sometimes, Pa? She asked. I miss this place. The last thing that Mitch wanted to do was come back. The hills were one place he didn't miss. We'll see. How about that? I know you miss your mother. Emma shrugged her shoulders. What if you leave someday, Pa? What if you leave us, and then you die, like Mama did? Mitch knew he shouldn't be surprised at Emma's words, but he was. I'm not going to leave, Emma, I promise you, Mitch told her as he gathered her into his arms. I know Mama didn't like the farm. She didn't like to do the work. Was that why she left? Was there too much work to do? Is that why you want to help me so much? Mitch asked her with sudden understanding. I like to help you, Pa, but I also figured if there weren't so much to do, you wouldn't want to leave. Maybe if I had helped her, she wouldn't have left. Oh, Emma, Mitch said sadly, I can't say exactly why your mama chose to leave, but it wasn't because you didn't help enough. You're a child, only 8 years old. You were 7 when she left, and when she died, you can't be expected to do adult work. I miss her, Pa. Emma sobbed into his shirt. Mitch held her for a while, wishing he knew what he could do to help her. He wished his late wife could see the suffering she had left behind. It's okay to miss her, Emma, Mitch finally said when Emma's crying slowed. I want you to know that while I married Allison so you and Jimmy could have a mother, I don't expect her to replace your mama. She is only here to help. Allison does cook better than... Emma stopped, as if suddenly afraid to say something negative about her mother. Mitch chuckled. He suspected what Emma had been about to say. Patricia had hated to cook, along with everything else, and had made only simple meals. Your mama was good at sewing, remember? She made you beautiful dresses, and the quilt on your bed. Your mama had her strengths, and Allison has hers. I'm growing out of the dresses, though, and Jimmy lost his baby quilt. Mitch thought of the blanket that his son had carried around constantly with him until Patricia's disappearance. He often wondered what had happened to it, but hadn't wanted to look for it. Even though you are growing out of your dresses, maybe you can still save them for your own daughter, Mitch suggested. Emma's face brightened for the first time since Mitch found her. Can I really? Sure, Mitch stood. We'd better get going. Allison and Jimmy are probably wondering what happened to us. Soon they were on their way back to their farm, while Emma settled in Mitch's arms and fell asleep. Chapter 6. Allison stood on the steps of the house and used her hand to shade her eyes as she looked in the direction in which Mitch had ridden, hoping to see something. She had been doing this periodically for the last few hours. During the wait, she had made a beef sandwich for Jimmy and done her best to stay busy, trying to keep their thoughts from Emma's disappearance. Allison had started praying for Emma's safety when she first realized she was missing, and as the day went on, she continued praying. Allison heard the screen door slam and felt a small hand in her own. She looked down at Jimmy and noticed he was pointing in the distance. Did he see something she hadn't seen? She strained her eyes, and sure enough, she soon saw a horse coming towards them. The farm dog boss also saw the horse and took off running towards it. As the horse got closer, she could see a small form in front of Mitch. He had found Emma, just like he'd said he would. When Mitch stopped his horse in the yard, Allison ran towards them, and he slid Emma down. He watched as Allison gathered Emma into her arms. "Oh, Emma, I'm so glad you're safe," Allison told her. She held the child for a moment until Emma started to pull away. "Let's get you cleaned up, shall we?" Emma nodded, but turned to her father. "Remember your promise, Pa." Mitch smiled down at her from his horse. "I will, and you remember yours." He turned his horse and rode it towards the barn, and Allison realized he needed to take care of something important. The rest of the day flew by. Allison helped Emma bathe and dress in fresh clothes. Emma refused to talk to Allison about what had happened, so she diverted the children's attention to other activities. She showed them how to make an egg cake for dinner, which the family enjoyed with a large plate of pancakes. Mitch helped the children get ready for bed that evening like he had the night before. Although wanting to be a part of the ritual, she received the distinct impression that Mitch wanted this time alone with his children. So Allison slipped outside and sat on the porch to watch the sunset. The reds, yellows, and oranges swirled together, very bright at first but soon fading to pastel colors. She heard the door open and Mitch stepped out of the house. He stood on the porch, leaning against a post. "Are they down for the night?" Allison asked him after a few minutes of silence. After another minute of contemplation, Mitch spoke up. "I hope you know Emma's disappearance wasn't your fault." Allison shrugged her shoulders. "I should have gone after her, but she ran away so fast. I didn't want to leave Jimmy. I figured she'd come back when she was ready. I didn't think she'd leave the farm." "You did right staying with Jimmy," Mitch told her. "Emma would have eventually returned. She told me she would have come back for dinner. She wanted those pancakes." Allison smiled. "I assume she ran away because she wants to keep working with you?" "She did, but I explained to her that she needs to go to school and help you," Mitch said. "I've been meaning to talk to you about school. When does it start?" "A week from next Wednesday," Mitch told her. "So Emma is willing to go?" "Yes, I explained to her that going to school is her job, just like taking care of the farm is mine. I don't think she's going to be happy always being with me when she's not in school," Allison said with concern. "I think she likes being outside, helping you." Mitch nodded his agreement. "I figured that out. I told her she could help me on Saturdays." Allison smiled. "That's good. She is only 8 years old after all. She has plenty of time to learn to take care of a house." She thought of one of the girls who had lived at Mary's home after she left, Sophie, who loved being outdoors. Emma might just always enjoy working outside. Mitch moved away from the post, and Allison expected him to leave and head towards the barn, but was surprised when he sat down next to her on the bench. His arm brushed against hers, and her heart skipped in response. She was starting to recognize that she was attracted to this man. The feelings she had towards him confused her. Why would she be attracted to someone who only married her to be a mother to his children? She pushed her thoughts away and jumped to her feet. "The children showed me around the farm yesterday, but why don't you show me as well?" she suggested. Maybe if they walked around, she would be able to get her emotions back to normal. Mitch hesitated, as if he didn't want to take her up on her suggestion, but then nodded. He stood and they started to walk away from the house. Allison noticed that the beautiful colors of the sunset had washed over the grass and the hills. Together they followed a fenced field for a few minutes. "I have 20 cows and 3 horses," Mitch broke the silence. "I hope to be able to double those numbers by next year." "Your farm is beautiful, what I've been able to see of it anyway," Allison told him. "I hope you were honest when you wrote in your letters that you won't mind living on a farm because nothing will make me leave this land. Nothing," Mitch told her firmly. Allison turned to him in surprise. "I wouldn't have come if I minded living on a farm." Mitch glanced at her. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't assume." "Assume what?" Allison asked, when he didn't finish his sentence. "Assume you'll automatically hate the farm," Mitch said. Allison was silent as she processed his words. "I think we have much to learn about each other," she finally said. Mitch smiled, as if relieved she wasn't angry. He pointed to the field beside which they were walking. "This is where I keep the cows when they aren't grazing in the hills." Allison squinted her eyes, trying to see the field in the dusky evening. She could faintly see a few cows. "Everything looks well cared for. It's been a struggle to try to stay on top of things because I've also needed to care for Emma and Jimmy. Many times I've had to take them with me. They are both too young to be left alone." Mitch stopped and lifted a leg to rest it on a fence post. "Now that you're here, they can be with you, and I won't have to worry about them. I can get caught up on my work." Although Allison noted that he sounded very happy, she wasn't sure if he was happy because he now could work without 2 young children underfoot, or because his children were going to be cared for. Probably both. Regardless of his reasons, Allison couldn't help but enjoy his pleasure. "I'm glad I'm here. I'll do whatever I can to help." Mitch stopped and faced her, and as they looked at each other, each wondered what the other was really feeling and thinking, and what the future held for them and for Emma and Jimmy. Mitch reached up and brushed some hair that the wind had blown into her face. He jerked his hand back, but not before she felt an unfamiliar tingle to the nerve endings in her cheek. She took a breath and stepped back, again forcing her thoughts to the reason she was here in South Dakota, hoping the reminder would help her not to enjoy their father's touch. Mitch turned away abruptly and pointed to a small building near the barn. "That's the chicken coop. Emma's quite good at collecting the eggs." "That's great that she has been such a big help to you," Allison commented. Mitch turned around and headed towards the barn. "I think you have seen everything that is important about the farm. I need to check on the animals." Allison watched as he disappeared through the doors of the barn. She was mystified as to why he would leave so quickly. Part of her wanted to follow him and find out what he meant by checking on the animals. She stood and looked at the barn and then decided to go back to the house. She had had enough excitement for one day. A few days later, Allison was just finishing up the breakfast dishes when she heard a horse and wagon drive into the yard. Boss barked to let everyone know there was a visitor. Emma peeked out of the kitchen window. "Oh, no," Emma breathed and backed away from the window. "It's Mrs. Wilson." Allison dried her hands on the dish towel she was holding and walked over to the window. She watched as Mitch helped a rather large woman down from her wagon. The woman walked up the porch steps, and Mitch disappeared into the barn. "She's probably come to see Pa's new wife. She's Great Spring's biggest gossip. She doesn't like us. Do we have to stay?" Emma pleaded. Allison hesitated and then shook her head. "No. I bet your Pa would like your help this morning." Emma sighed with relief. "Come on, Jimmy." Both children slipped out the side door just as Allison heard pounding at the front door. As much as she was looking forward to meeting some of her neighbors, she already felt certain she wasn't going to enjoy this visit, thanks to Emma's reaction. Allison smoothed her apron with her hands as she opened the front door. "May I help you?" she asked the woman. "I've come to see how things are going," the woman announced as she entered the house without an invitation. She walked into the living room like she had been there before and plopped herself down on one of the sofas. Allison shut the door and followed her visitor. "Can I ask who you are?" Allison asked pointedly. "Oh, I'm Dorothy Wilson. My husband owns the general store in town. Imagine my shock when I heard that Mitch had up and married again. I decided it was my duty to come out here and see if it was true." "Well, as you can see, it is true," Allison said as she sat down on the other sofa. "Mitch and I married a few days ago." "Where are you from?" the woman demanded. "Would you like some tea?" Allison offered, instantly deciding she wasn't going to satisfy this woman's curiosity so quickly. Dorothy hesitated and then nodded. "Yes, tea would be nice." Allison left the room with her uninvited visitor and quickly put water into the tea kettle to boil. She wished she had asked Emma to bring her father in. Maybe he would know what to say to this woman. She cut a small piece of cake left over from dinner the evening before and placed it on a plate. When the water was hot enough for tea, she quickly prepared it, but didn't prepare any for herself. She took a deep breath as she carried the tea into the living room. Maybe Dorothy would decide all is well and wouldn't stay very long. The woman started talking the moment Allison entered the room, as if she hadn't left at all. I know that those children are a handful. How are you doing with them? Dorothy accepted the tea without saying thank you and immediately took a sip. As she held her cup, she held out her little finger as if saying she knew the proper way to drink tea. Emma and Jimmy are a delight, Allison said, trying to smile. Dorothy gave her a narrowed look. A delight, huh? I've heard Emma refuses to go to school and Jimmy can't talk. Allison continued to smile, although she was fast losing patience. They have had some challenges in their young lives, but they are doing well. Dorothy continued talking as if Allison hadn't said a word. It's a shame, really. Allison leaned back on the sofa and didn't take the hint. After a moment, Dorothy kept on talking. We all knew that woman wouldn't stay. Allison's smile started to falter. She had no idea what Dorothy was talking about, but she abhorred gossip. Patricia wasn't a strong woman. Everyone could see it. Mitch should have seen it. He never should have brought her here to South Dakota. I never could understand why a man would want to force a woman to live here when it was perfectly obvious she wasn't going to stick around. I'm sure Mitch was doing what he felt was best for his family, Allison couldn't help saying. Dorothy shrugged and took another sip of her tea, her little finger continuing to stick out straight as a board. Allison had to cover her mouth with a slight cough because she was tempted to laugh. You know what men are like, they just plow along with their own plans. Where did you say you met Mitch? I didn't. None of us knew he was even courting someone, and Patricia hasn't even been gone a year. Allison couldn't take it anymore and jumped to her feet. Would you like some more cake? Dorothy nodded her head. Don't mind if I do. Allison escaped to the kitchen. She wanted to run away, like Emma had the day before, but as she started to cut another piece of cake, the back door opened, and Mitch walked in. I thought I'd rescue you, he whispered, as he reached around her and picked up a small crumb of cake off the plate. There's not much left of this cake. If you can get her to leave, I'll bake another cake for you, Allison said, trying to bribe him. Deal. Mitch smiled at her and left the room. Allison couldn't hear what was said, but she heard Dorothy exclaim, Well, I never. The front screen door opened and slammed shut. Allison ran to the window and watched as Mitch almost forcefully put Dorothy on her wagon and gave her the horse's reins. He hit the horse on its rump and it quickly pulled the wagon down the lane. Allison left the house and thanked Mitch. I guess I should have been more gracious, but she said awful things about you, the children, and... She hesitated. And Patricia, Mitch finished her sentence. I was going to hide out in the barn until she left, but Emma convinced me I needed to come help you. I'll have to thank Emma then, Allison smiled. Dorothy is harmless enough. I think she's lonely. Her husband works hard enough for 2 men and won't let his wife lift a finger. Allison kept her thoughts to herself, but she knew Dorothy was anything but harmless. She had come to make accusations and spread lies. She was also seeking information, which Allison wasn't willing to give. Can you tell me a little about Patricia? Allison dared ask. I think it might help if I knew something about her. Maybe we can figure out why Jimmy isn't talking. Allison quickly regretted her question. Mitch's countenance instantly switched from playful to angry. Patricia is the last person I want to talk about, Mitch growled. He turned without another word and strode towards the barn. Allison had asked because even though Dorothy had said things she shouldn't have, Allison still had no idea what had happened to Patricia, and having only been married to Mitch for a short time, she could see that this family was still in pain from fresh wounds. Was that why she was there? Why was she drawn to Mitch's letter? Jimmy wouldn't talk, apparently for no obvious reason. Emma ran away when she found out she couldn't keep working with her father. Mitch walked away when the subject of his late wife was brought up. Allison started to see that some healing needed to happen about the past before they could go forward as a family. As she turned away and went into the house to finish her morning chores, she smiled slightly to herself. Mitch had come to help her, and he had teased her about the cake being gone. She would make him another like she promised, and she hoped that someday Mitch would be willing to tell her about Patricia. Only then would the healing begin with her new family. Chapter 7. The next day was Sunday, and Allison was glad when Mitch agreed to take the family to church. She felt it was important that they show a united front as a new family to the townspeople, especially after Dorothy Wilson's visit the day before. Mitch told her that many people had made cruel judgments about him and the children because of Patricia's death, and it was easier to avoid them than to confront the problem. She knew that Mitch hadn't taken the children to church since his wife had died, and she was glad he was willing to make this change. When they arrived at the small white church, Allison immediately noticed what Mitch was talking about. When they walked into the chapel and made their way to a side pew, a few people noticed them, and immediately the whispers began. While a couple of people smiled at them, most turned their backs, and some even frowned at them as if appalled that they had come to church. Allison kept a smile on her face as she ushered Jimmy and Emma into the pew after Mitch. She was going to do her best to change the townspeople's opinion of Mitch. Ironically, the Reverend talked about the evils of gossip and judging, and Allison smiled to herself. Maybe everyone will listen to their spiritual leader. When the service ended, Emma asked Mitch if she could talk with a friend, and she immediately disappeared at her father's nod. "I forgot to tell you," Mitch whispered as they left the church. "With school starting next week, we usually have a meal outside after church. Everyone brings something to share." "Oh," Allison exclaimed with dismay. "I should have brought something to contribute." Mitch shrugged. "If it's a problem, we'll just leave. In fact, we can leave now if you want, and not stay for the meal." Allison was tempted to take Mitch up on his suggestion, but then shook her head. They needed to face things head-on. As they stepped into the sunshine, she could see Emma talking animatedly with another girl her age. She knew they needed to stay, especially for the children's sake. She took Jimmy's hand and they followed Mitch to where a group of people were standing. Some women were already placing food they had prepared on some tables, and children were running around starting a game of tag. "I can't believe you'd show your face in church of all places," a woman boomed out as they approached. Allison could see Dorothy Wilson standing behind this woman, and she wondered if Dorothy was encouraging this confrontation. Allison glanced at Mitch and saw that his jaw had clenched. She turned to the woman, determined to be friendly. "Hello, my name is Allison. Mitch and I married just a few days ago." "Humph," the woman grunted and turned to Mitch. "Are you going to run her off too?" "Now, Agnes." A woman next to her laid a hand on her arm. "Didn't the Reverend just talk to us about turning the other cheek?" "Humph," Agnes said again. "It's just not right, let me tell you. Here's a man who runs off a wife, who then dies, and doesn't even allow his daughter to attend school. Look at his son, too afraid to talk. Something is just not right, let me tell you." Allison turned to the woman who was trying to hush Agnes's words. "Hello?" The woman smiled kindly at her. "Don't mind Agnes. She doesn't represent most of us. I'm Adelaide. We live next to your farm." "It's nice to meet you," Allison told her and looked around for Mitch. She noticed that he had walked away. "Some people don't know the whole story and they feel they have the right to judge. You'll find that most of us don't feel the same way, although I should warn you that Agnes does have friends who will probably say the same things she did." "Is Dorothy Wilson her friend? She came to visit yesterday." Adelaide frowned. "I'm not surprised she came out. Dorothy prides herself on knowing everything there is to know about everyone. She probably came out to get information about you." "As she didn't get very far, I try to not let people dictate how I will react," Allison replied with a smile. "Thank you for the welcome. I see Emma is talking to Penny. She's my daughter and they are good friends." "It's good to see Emma will have a friend when she attends school next week," Allison said. She wanted Adelaide to know that things were changing since she had arrived. Adelaide looked relieved. "Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Penny will be so happy. They are the only girls in their age group. All the others are boys." Some other women approached them and Adelaide made the introductions. Although most of them were friendly and welcoming, a few acted like they felt the same as Agnes did. Allison knew that it was going to take time to change the way people thought of Mitch and his family, but she would do her best to help that along. She turned to Jimmy, who was still holding her hand. "Why don't you go join those boys over there, Jimmy? They look like they are playing a fun game of tag." Jimmy looked longingly at the boys who were running around, and Allison knew he wanted to be a part of the game, but he shook his head. "Some of the boys haven't been very kind to Jimmy either," Adelaide whispered to Allison. She nodded in understanding, instantly deciding that Jimmy would stay right by her side. The rest of the afternoon went smoothly. The people who didn't want them there eventually ignored her when they realized she wasn't going to leave. Some women even started to warm up to her, and one older woman invited her to the next quilting bee she was having at her home when the harvesting and canning season was over. Allison was glad to see that Mitch was talking to some of the men. When it was finally time to leave, Adelaide promised she would come over in a few days to visit. The next day, Allison spent the morning weeding the garden. Emma and Jimmy helped as much as they could, and she was grateful for their company. At one point, they took a break and drank cool water from their well. "We should take water to Pa," Emma suggested. "That's a great idea, Emma," Allison told her. "It's such a hot day. Why don't you refill this jug and then we'll go find him?" "I know where he's at. He's cutting hay," Emma said. Soon the three of them were heading towards the field where Mitch was working. She couldn't believe how hot the sun was. She had never felt the type of heat South Dakota had. She was sure Mitch would be happy for a cool drink. A few minutes later, they approached the field where Mitch was mowing. He saw them coming and stopped his horse. Allison could see that the grass Mitch had cut lay in neat rows. "I'm glad to see you," Mitch said as they drew near. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve and took the water jug Emma offered. He drank deeply and then poured the rest over his head. He shook his hair like a dog, and water droplets rained down on the children, who were standing close to him. They giggled. "Do you want any more, Pa?" Emma asked. "That would be great, sweetheart," Mitch told her. Both of the children ran towards the well to refill the jug. "Thanks for bringing the water," Mitch told her, and he held her gaze for a moment. Allison reflected that he had been acting differently toward her since the church picnic. He seemed to know she could handle what came her way and wasn't going to run at the first sign of trouble, even from a bunch of gossiping townspeople. He smiled quite a bit after they had arrived back at the farm. One time he had looked at her like he was trying to figure her out, and when she smiled at him, he smiled back. After the dinner dishes were done, he had casually dropped a hand on her shoulder as he thanked her for the meal she had prepared. "I'm hoping I can finish cutting this field today. If it can dry out properly, we should have plenty of hay for the winter." Allison bent, picked up a few strands of grass, and sniffed it. "Can you see how dry it is?" he asked as he closed a fist over hers. Allison froze at his touch. Didn't he know what he did to her when he touched her? She suddenly longed to touch his face with her hand and to experience his kiss again, even if it was brief, like the kiss he had given her when they married. She couldn't tear her gaze away from his. Mitch's hand lifted to her hair. "You have some dirt in your hair." He used his hand to brush it away. Allison closed her eyes, forcing herself to resist the urge to turn her face towards his hand. Mitch stepped back abruptly. "Gotta get to work if I want to get done today," he muttered. He turned away from her, towards the horse. Allison turned around and all but ran towards the house. She escaped into the cool exterior and touched her burning face with her hands. She knew he had probably seen her reaction to him, and she was sure that that was the last thing he wanted. He didn't want another wife. She had to remember that. Chapter 8. Over the next few days, Emma willingly stayed with Allison when Mitch left the house for the day. She did her best to help with some of the housekeeping chores and even helped make some oatmeal cookies. Allison made an effort to spend some time with the children, reading to them each day after lunch, and she knew both of them enjoyed the stories. She also went through Emma's clothing to make sure she had something nice to wear on her first day of school. As she sorted through the clothing, she could see most of Emma's dresses were well worn and too short for her. She only had one dress that would work, the same one she had worn to church. Allison knew that they needed to make a trip to the store for fabric. Jimmy also had the same problem with his clothes, and when Allison washed all the clothes the day before school started, she could see even Mitch needed new things. She had her work cut out for her. That evening, she made plans with Mitch to go to town on the next Saturday for some much-needed shopping. Emma told Allison about Mitch's idea to save the dresses her mother had made her for her own daughter. Allison didn't have the heart to tell her that the dresses were almost too worn to be saved, but promised her that she would help Emma fix some of the tears and holes. They could then wrap them in paper to keep them safe in a trunk. On the first day of school, Emma awoke upset, and Allison wondered if Mitch was going to have to drag her to school. Eventually, Emma left with a smile when her friend Penny came by to walk with her. "Nerves," Mitch said as they both stood on the porch and watched the two girls skip away, swinging their metal lunch pails. "I know I should have made her go to school last year, even with her mother dying, but I just couldn't." Allison laid a hand on his shoulder, and he jumped slightly at the contact. "You did the best you could, Mitch. Most people know that." Mitch nodded at her gratefully and then left her side to start his day. After lunch, Adelaide finally arrived for the promised visit. "I thought I'd stay until our girls get home from school," Adelaide said. "Would that work for you?" Allison nodded her head gratefully as she invited Adelaide to sit down in the cool living room. "I'm so glad you came." Adelaide shook her head at Allison's invitation to sit down. "I came to visit, but I also came to help. I'm sure you have quite a bit of mending to do. Why don't we take it outside and work under the shade tree?" Allison liked the suggestion, and soon the two women were settled under the tree on a blanket, a small mound of clothing beside them. She sent Jimmy to the barn to retrieve his favorite kitten, and when Mitch saw that Adelaide had come to visit, he offered to take Jimmy with him for the afternoon. Allison accepted gratefully. She had some questions for Adelaide, questions that she might be willing to answer, especially since she couldn't get any information from Mitch. "How are things going?" Adelaide asked as she picked up one of Jimmy's shirts to mend. "As well as can be expected," Allison told her. She chose a sock that needed darning. "I know you don't know me very well, but I hope we can be friends," Adelaide said with a smile. "Tell me about your family," Allison invited. "I have 4 children. My 2 oldest boys are 16 and 18 years old. Then there's Penny, who is Emma's age. Then Luke, my 1-year-old. "You didn't bring Luke with you," Allison observed. "No, my mother lives with us, and she offered to watch him," Adelaide responded. "It gives me a break and gives my mother a chance to spoil him," she smiled. "How long have you lived in South Dakota?" "Almost 7 years now," Adelaide responded. "We moved here right before Mitch came with Patricia." "So you knew Mitch's wife?" Adelaide hesitated. "Yes. I can't say we were good friends, but I knew her." Allison set the sock aside. "Can you please tell me what you know about Patricia and her death? Mitch refuses to talk about it with me. All 3 of them are still suffering from whatever happened. Jimmy isn't talking. Emma has a hard time when she isn't with Mitch, and Mitch—" Allison didn't finish her sentence, not knowing what to say. "I can tell you what I know, but I do think you need to talk with Mitch. Let him know you talked to me." "I will, but could you tell me what you know first?" "Yes. 9 months ago, I came to pay a visit to Patricia. I knew Mitch had plans to leave to travel to a ranch some distance away in order to purchase some animals. He was to be gone for about a week. Mitch had been away for about 3 days when I showed up. I knocked on the door and no one answered, but I could smell something burning, so I opened the door. I called for Patricia, but I didn't see her. There was smoke coming from the kitchen, so I went in there and found Emma standing at the stove clutching her hands and crying. She had been trying to fry eggs and they had started to burn. She had pulled the pan off the stove without any protection on her hands and burned them. Jimmy was huddled in a corner of the kitchen. "Oh, those poor children," Allison murmured. I aired out the kitchen, bandaged Emma's hands, and cleaned up the mess. Jimmy refused to leave the corner. I was finally able to get Emma to tell me her mother had left the day after Mitch did. I took them home with me and cared for them until Mitch returned. Jimmy didn't say a word the entire time. Emma didn't know why Jimmy wouldn't talk. "I wish Mitch had told me this," Allison said. "What you have told me explains quite a bit." Adelaide nodded her head sadly. Mitch found out that Patricia ran away with another man. They were both killed in a train wreck about a month later. I probably shouldn't say any more, but I do want to tell you that I think you are the best thing that has happened to this family since Patricia left. I just hope I can make a difference, Allison confessed. I think you already have. I haven't seen Emma smile and laugh the way she did last Sunday at church for quite some time, and Mitch couldn't keep his eyes off of you. What? Allison squeaked. I was watching him. He was talking with the other men, but he kept looking at you. Adelaide's words did something to Allison's heart, but she pushed them away. They had a marriage of convenience. If Mitch was watching her, it was probably because he wanted to make sure she didn't say anything wrong. Adelaide reached into her bag and pulled some fabric out. She spread it out in front of her. Allison could see it was a small baby quilt, beautifully done. It looked worn and well-loved. There was a large tear in one of the squares. "This is Jimmy's baby blanket. Patricia made it for him when he was born. She was a very good seamstress. Jimmy carried this blanket almost everywhere he went. When I took the children back to my farm that day, I made sure Jimmy had his quilt, but it disappeared the next day. I couldn't find it anywhere. A few days after Mitch returned and came to get Emma and Jimmy, one of my boys found it hidden under some rocks behind the barn. I was going to return it, but something stopped me." Allison reached out and touched the quilt. Although the colors were faded, she could tell someone who was very skilled had made it. "Why did you bring it to me now?" "I decided now that Jimmy has a new mother, you might know what to do with it." Allison fingered the tear. "Maybe I can fix this. I probably won't do as good a job as Patricia could have. I can tell she definitely knew how to sew. Emma has some dresses she made her that are beautiful, but she's outgrown them. Mitch suggested she save them in a trunk and give them to her own daughter someday." "That's a great suggestion," Adelaide smiled. "Yes, it is. Some of them have small tears. I'm going to help her fix them." Adelaide touched the quilt. "I don't think Jimmy will care how you fix this. He'll probably be happy to have it back." "Maybe it will help him talk again," Allison said. Adelaide spent the next few hours with Allison. By the time she left, both of them had been able to mend quite a few pieces of clothing. Allison hid the quilt in her sewing basket so Jimmy wouldn't see it. She decided she would stay up later for the next few nights and mend the quilt. Then she would present it to Jimmy. She felt very excited about her idea of fixing it, but for some reason, she kept her secret from Mitch. Maybe she could surprise all of them when it was completed. Chapter 9. A few days later, after Emma had returned home from school, Allison could tell that a storm was coming. The afternoon had grown dark and dreary. She was glad to see Emma arrive safely and hoped the storm would hold off until dinner when Mitch would be inside. For some unknown reason, the storm had a strange feel to it that she hadn't ever felt before. Every once in a while, she looked out the living room window and could see that the hills in the distance were getting a thorough drenching. She hoped the storm would move away from them, but that wasn't to be, and she saw some lightning flash. It looked like it came from behind the barn. "I'm going to go and see if your dad is okay," she told the children. "You both stay put." They nodded to her solemnly. "Emma, you do your schoolwork and then you can read one of the books I brought to Jimmy." Allison dashed outside before she saw Emma nod in agreement. She ran towards the back of the barn, and what she saw terrified her. Mitch had a horse by its reins, and it was rearing in fear, most likely because of the lightning. Mitch was doing his best to calm the horse down. "It's okay, settle down," Mitch yelled. Lightning flashed again, and large drops of water began to fall as Mitch tried to pull the horse down to keep him from rearing. When he saw her, he became angry. "What are you doing out here?" Mitch yelled at her. "Go back inside with the children." "I can help. What do you want me to do?" Allison shouted back over the wind and rain. Another flash of lightning made the horse rear in a frenzy, and Allison could see that it was all Mitch could do to hold on to the horse. Allison saw part of the reins flapping in the wind and grabbed onto it. Mitch looked at her angrily again, but allowed her to help. Between the two of them, they were able to lead the frightened horse into the barn. "Whoa, boy!" Mitch called to the horse as it neighed in panic inside the barn. He turned to Allison. "Hang on to the reins the best you can." Slowly they got the horse calmed down and soon had it settled inside a dry stall. The moment the horse was calm, Mitch turned to her. "This is no place for a woman." Allison was stunned by his words. Hadn't she been able to help him? From what she could tell, it took both of them to get the frightened horse into the barn and calm him down. "I'm not a wimpy woman," she finally retorted. She breathed heavily, partly because of the work she had just performed with the horse, but also because of what Mitch had just said. "Go back to the house," Mitch ordered her angrily. "I'm not Patricia," Allison yelled back. "I'm not going to leave like she did. Are you ever going to accept me for who I am?" Allison felt tears coming, so she ran out of the barn into the rain. She knew she had gone too far. She shouldn't have said what she did, but as she said those words to him, she realized she wanted him to love her just a little. She wanted him to see that she wasn't Patricia, that she wasn't going to hurt this family, to hurt him. She groaned to herself as she realized what she had just said to him. "Oh, God," she prayed as the rain dripped down her face. "Will he ever forgive me for what I said? What have I done?" She turned towards the house and walked slowly towards it, not knowing that Mitch was watching her in the doorway of the barn. Once she was inside, she quickly went upstairs, took off her drenched clothing, dried off and put on dry clothes. The rain continued to beat down on the earth, but there was no longer any lightning. After a while, Mitch came in, and Allison gave him a towel to dry off, not daring to look at him in the eyes. She realized that part of the reason she had been so angry, so hurt, was that he was rejecting her. She turned to take the towel from Mitch and noticed that he had blood flowing down his arm. She gasped in shock. "You hurt yourself. When did this happen?" Allison asked. She couldn't remember if he had been bleeding in the barn, but she also knew she had been too angry to notice anything. "Pa," Emma gasped. "You're bleeding." "It's just a small cut," Mitch growled. "It looks like more than a small cut," Allison replied, instantly forgetting her hurt and anger. She bent her head and examined the wound. It was about 3 inches long, and part of it looked deep. "I'm fine," Mitch shook her hand away, but Allison pushed him towards a chair. "That cut needs to be stitched." "Allison," Mitch growled again. "Do you want it to get infected?" Allison almost shouted at him. "I'm a nurse, remember? Believe me, this cut needs stitches." Mitch gaped at her in amazement, as if he was shocked she was so upset that he was refusing care for his cut. He sat back and allowed her to examine his arm again. Allison went to her room and retrieved a small bag with first aid supplies. She sent both children to their rooms so they wouldn't have to watch her stitch up their dad. Mitch sat quietly while she cleaned his cut with a disinfectant. She sterilized a needle and thread and then looked at him. "This is going to hurt," she said quietly, looking him in his eyes. "Just do it," he said, as if resigned that she was going to do what she wanted, regardless of what he wanted. Allison had a small container of alcohol in her first aid kit. She encouraged Mitch to take a few swallows, hoping that it would numb some of the pain that Allison knew he would feel when she stitched the cut. She could tell Mitch wanted to refuse the drink, but after hesitating for a few moments, he did take a few swallows. Allison was relieved that he was cooperating with her and quickly stitched the cut closed. She only needed to make 5 stitches. She then wrapped up the wound and then sat down on the chair next to him. She couldn't help the tears that ran down her face. She hoped Mitch wouldn't notice because he was busy examining the bandage, but then he looked at her. "Oh, Allison." Mitch reached out a hand and covered one of hers. "I'm okay. I guess I have to say, it's nice to have a nurse in the family. Otherwise, I would have had to go out for the doctor in this weather." Allison didn't say anything, but continued to cry silently. "What's wrong?" Mitch asked, finally realizing she was upset for another reason than his injured arm. "My mother. She died from a cut similar to yours, Allison said, trying to stop her tears. I don't think I'm going to die. No, of course not. But my mother, she worked at a factory trying to support us. My father died when I was younger than Emma. Mother cut herself on some machinery. She didn't have money for a doctor and she hid the cut from me. She died weeks later of gangrene. Mitch gazed at her with sympathy, keeping her hand in his. I'm sorry, Allison. I bet that was hard, watching your mother die like that. Allison wiped her face with her free hand. I didn't even know she had cut herself until it was too late. I was 16 when she died. That's when I was sent to an orphanage and lived there for a few days. Fortunately, Mr. Davis came and offered me a home with himself and his wife. They owned a girls' home for orphans and took me in. Is that where you learned how to be a nurse? Mitch asked. Allison shook her head. No. When I turned 18, there was a doctor who had a practice near the girls' home. He had heard I wanted to learn how to help sick and injured people. He offered to teach me. It's a good thing you learned what you did. Even though I wasn't really watching you stitch me up, I could tell you knew what you were doing. Allison smiled at him shakily. I'm sorry about what I said in the barn. Don't worry about it. We were both cold and wet and... I like living here, Allison interrupted him. I made a promise to you, and I'm going to keep it. Are you sure? Mitch turned her to face him, demanding that she tell him the truth. Yes, I'm sure. I love being a mother to Emma and Jimmy. I would do it all again, if I had a choice. Mitch made her look at him, and this time she didn't hide her eyes. What he saw must have answered whatever question he had, for he pulled her to him and held her in his arms. Allison's heart started to pound rapidly. She loved being in his arms. Mitch tilted her face up to his and started to lean down as Allison closed her eyes in anticipation of his kiss. Is Pa going to be okay? Allison heard a voice that sounded like it was coming from a distance. Mitch pulled away from her and stood to face Emma. I'm fine. Allison fixed me up. Allison noticed that Mitch's voice sounded a bit shaky. Did their almost kiss affect him as much as it did her? Would she ever get to feel a real kiss from him? Chapter 10. It took 3 evenings for Allison to fix the tear in Jimmy's quilt. She also found some smaller rips that she fixed. Then, Allison washed the quilt and hoped it would be dry by the next day. Saturday morning came quickly. After everyone had finished eating breakfast, Allison smiled at them. Before we start our day, I have a surprise for Jimmy, Allison smiled. Jimmy jerked his head up at his name and looked at Allison quizzically. Penny's mother came to visit a few days ago, and she gave me something that Jimmy had lost. Allison stood and removed the quilt she had hidden in a cupboard. She carefully unfolded it and spread it out in front of Jimmy. Oh, Mitch exclaimed as he saw the quilt. Look what your new mama did, Jimmy. You fixed the hole, Emma said as she reached out and touched the stitching that Allison had sewed. Adelaide told me that your mother made this for you, Jimmy. She found it behind the... Allison stopped talking as she watched Jimmy's face. At first, when she had spread the quilt on the table, Jimmy hadn't reacted at all. But as everyone started to talk, his face converted as if in extreme pain. Suddenly, he let out a loud wail. He screamed and screamed as he jumped out of his chair and pushed the quilt away from him. Jimmy? Mitch stood and reached out to pick him up, but Jimmy fell down on the floor as he continued to scream. Allison was speechless. She had never heard such a sound as what she heard from Jimmy. It was as if he were letting out all of his grief and pain at once. Allison looked at Emma, who was looking at her brother in disbelief. She didn't know if she should go to Jimmy or Emma, but Mitch made the decision for her and scooped up his son into his arms. Jimmy continued to scream. Allison put an arm around Emma and whispered, "It's going to be okay." Emma buried her face in Allison's skirts. "Calm down, son," Mitch whispered to Jimmy. He looked at Allison with confusion. Allison wished she had handled the gift of the quilt differently. It never occurred to her that the sight of the quilt would upset Jimmy so much. After a few minutes, Jimmy started to settle down. Then Allison heard an amazing sound. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry," he muttered over and over. Allison and Mitch looked at each other in amazement. Jimmy was talking. "It wasn't your fault," Mitch said to his son. He sounded calm, but Allison could see the anguish on his face. But Jimmy wasn't listening. "I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't mean to," he continued muttering. "What didn't you mean to do?" Allison finally asked Jimmy. He looked at Allison for a moment. "I ripped my blanket." "I didn't mean to. Mama was mad. She left because I ripped my blanket." Jimmy turned to Mitch. "I didn't mean to, honest, Pa." "Oh, Jimmy," Mitch hugged his son. "It wasn't your fault your mother left. It wasn't your fault." "I remember what happened," Emma suddenly said. "Mama wasn't happy that you left, Pa." "The day you left, she spent most of her time in your bedroom. Me and Jimmy went to our hideout to play. Mama told us we could. She said she had a headache and we had to stay outside and play. Jimmy took his blanket. While we were playing, his blanket got caught in the trees. It ripped. When Mama finally called us in to eat, she saw the rip and got really mad at Jimmy. She said she wasn't going to ever fix it, that he had to have a ripped blanket to help him remember. He's a bad boy." Allison felt very angry at Emma's story, although she tried to hold it back. What kind of mother told a child they were bad because they ripped a blanket? Emma turned to Mitch. "The next day, Mama left with that man. She told us we had to stay inside until you got back. She left us some food. She said something bad would happen to us if we left the house, but we ran out of food. So you decided to cook some eggs." Mitch filled in the story that he knew. Emma nodded. "And they got burnt. There was smoke all over the kitchen, and I burned my hands." "I was very glad Adelaide came by," Mitch said. "She took you to her house." "But Mama said we had to stay in the house or something bad would happen," Jimmy said. "Jimmy, is that why you stopped talking, because you were afraid something bad would happen?" asked Mitch. "Mama died. Something bad did happen. What if something bad happens to Pa?" replied Jimmy tearfully. No, Mitch said as he tried to comfort him. "Your Mama died because of choices she made. It had nothing to do with you or Emma." Allison noticed that both children looked very relieved at Mitch's words. She stood and quickly folded up the quilt. She'd keep it safe for Jimmy. Maybe when he was older, he'd want this memory of his mother, a good memory of a quilt she had made for him. The four of them sat around the table in silence for a while, each thinking their own thoughts. Allison knew she should get the dishes done, but at that moment she had no desire to start them. Would things ever be normal with her new family? She married Mitch because she wanted a family, wanted to make a difference, but had she? "I have an idea," Mitch broke the silence. "Allison, will you make us a picnic? We can go to the hills by the river and spend the day there." "Can we really, Pa?" Emma squealed, and even Jimmy looked happy at this plan. "Yes, we've been working hard. Emma, you have kept your promise to me and are going to school. Let's take a day off and play." And that was what Allison did with her new family. She made some sandwiches and placed them in a small basket with some apples and cookies she had made the day before. She added a canteen of water and found an old blanket to take along. Mitch determined that they could walk to the hills, so they did. Both Emma and Jimmy ran ahead of Allison and Mitch, and her heart swelled with love for children. It was good to see them both carefree and happy. Although Jimmy wasn't chattering like Emma was, he did say a few words now and then, and Allison hoped that the days of Jimmy not wanting to talk were now over. When they arrived at the base of the hills, Allison marveled at their beauty. The leaves on the trees were starting to turn autumn colors. The river wasn't very deep and was slow moving, but the water was cool. Allison spread out the blanket and sat down on it to watch her family's antics as Mitch played with Emma and Jimmy. The three of them had an impromptu water fight. Then Emma and Jimmy ran around in the river trying to catch some fast-moving trout. Allison wasn't at all worried that one of them would catch one, since they were splashing so much. They enjoyed the lunch Allison had prepared, and afterward, Emma asked for permission to walk up the river and explore. Mitch agreed, allowing Emma and Jimmy to run off together. Allison watched as the two stopped a little way upstream, bending down to inspect something in the water. She could hear them talking to each other and saw Emma point to something in the distance. Jimmy laughed and put his hands in the water to play in it. Allison knew she would never get tired of hearing Jimmy talk and laugh. Mitch sat down beside her, and immediately her heart began to palpitate. She saw him look at his children and then back at her. "I'll have to thank Emma later for asking to leave us alone," he said softly with a smile. Allison felt confused. What was he trying to say? "I actually wanted a chance to be alone with you without two curious children around. I wanted a chance to tell you how I feel." He picked up her hand and ran his thumb over the back of it. "Maybe you can guess how I feel." "Yes, I can guess. You are grateful." "What do you mean? Of course I'm grateful. You have done wonders for my family." "Emma is happy. She's going to school and learning how to cook. Because of you, Jimmy talked today for the first time since Patricia left. But that's not what I meant." "You'll have to tell me what you mean." Allison held her breath. Was he going to say what she hoped he would say? "I want to tell you that I am falling in love with you." Are you sure?" Allison asked, hardly daring to hope. Tears were gathering in her eyes, and she blinked hard to keep them from falling. "I know we agreed on a marriage of convenience, but I'm starting to see that it's not enough." His eyes narrowed when she didn't say anything. "Allison, tell me what you're thinking." She suddenly felt a happiness that she'd never thought she'd feel. It started in the middle of her chest and felt like it was going to burst out of her. She started to laugh. Mitch frowned. "That's not quite the reaction I expected." "Oh, Mitch. Don't you know how much I have hated the words, marriage of convenience?" She smiled at him, hoping he would be able to see the love she felt for him. "I've fallen in love with you, too." "Really?" His eyes lit up. Then he became serious, cupped her face with one hand, and brought her close to him with the other. Mitch bent his head and placed his lips on hers. At that moment, Allison felt their souls touch. She finally experienced a marriage kiss. It was perfect. She had the love she had always hoped for, the family she had prayed for.